it is relevant for us today because the way that they reacted is too often the way that we react. Moses had led the nation of Israel to freedom. They came out of Egypt. The scripture says with a high hand. After the plagues and after all the miracles, the signs and the wonders, they left Egypt. Freedom. They crossed the Red Sea. Miraculous. Now they had been traveling for almost 2 years since they left Egypt. And they finally came to this place called Kadesh. At Kadesh, they were getting ready. They were preparing. They were like on the water's edge just to cross over. Cross over into the promised land. There is an immeasurable distance between faith and fear. And that's the topic that I want to talk about this morning. Even though it was just a short physical distance to cross over from Kadesh into the promised land, yet because of fear or because of faith, made it an immeasurable distance. And so here they were at the water's edge, excited, ready to go in to possess their land. When Moses sends out 12 men, he says, let me send a team, a reconnaissance team. Let me send out these men who would be able to report back, a fact-finding team, to check out the land and to report back. Because here we are prepared now to enter into our own country, one that was promised to us for over 400 years. We looked forward for this time. Excuse me. But before they entered the land, Moses said, I'm going to send out this team to report back. They received a report, Moses did, a mixed report. We can call it a majority report and a minority report. But these reports, they represented faith and it represented fear. These reports, one was looking through the eyes of faith and one was looking through the eyes of fear. Two spies, Joshua and Caleb, their report was this: man, there are possibilities in this new land. There are opportunities in this new land. Let's go up and let's possess it. Let's go for it. We can take it. The 10 spies reported a list of why we can't do it. of why it's so difficult to do. I'm reminded of a quote by Rick DeVos, the Amway man. It says, the easiest thing to find on God's green earth is someone to tell you all the things you cannot do. You're going to see through the eyes of faith, or you're going to see through the eyes of fear. And when we look at our lives today, the children of Israel, when they saw the promised land, when they viewed the promised land, they saw their future. When we look around us today, when we look into the future, our future, are we seeing possibilities? Are we seeing opportunities? Are we looking through the eyes of faith, or are we fearful, looking through the eyes of fear? The 10 spies, they saw giants. They saw fortified cities. They said walls that were impregnable to overcome. They saw impossibilities, the 10 spies. They were looking through the eyes of fear. Let me give you a test question. Do you remember the name of the 10 spies? Listen, the point is, nobody remembers the critics who said that it can't be done. Nobody remembers negative people. Nobody. The only people who gets remembered are those who said, let's get it done for God. Let's do it. We name our children after those ones. Joshua and Caleb. No one named their children after the 10 spies. Shammua. Gadmiel. Nobody remembers the critics and the negative people. So here's what happened when we look through the eyes of fear, brothers and sisters. One, we overestimate the problem. We overestimate it. Now you know when we read this text, when these 10 spies were giving this report, man, these guys were exaggerating. They were telling a fish story, a fish tale. Big, 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 big one. But he slipped off the line. We overestimate the problem. God had just delivered these people, man, from Egypt. They just saw all the miracles, all the wonders in Egypt. They saw how God brought the plagues on the Egyptians, and they were protected. They saw that threatening Red Sea, and yet God opened it for them. They saw all of this. But now they come to the place at the water's edge, and they become fearful and afraid. When you look at your problems with the eyes of fear, they get bigger and bigger and bigger every time out. And the more you look at your problems, listen, the bigger it gets. The mountain just keeps getting bigger before you. When you look through the eyes of fear, when somebody criticizes you and you begin to think about it and worry about it, listen, you think, the whole world criticizing me. We overestimate the problem. It grows by proportion. And so the majority report of the spies was a negative report. We cannot do it. And brothers and sisters, the majority report is almost always negative. Check it out. And so anybody who's going to get anything done, substantial, anything done in this world, you're going to have to go against the majority report, because the majority of people are going to be looking through the eyes of fear rather than the eyes of faith. Because there are always more negative people, always more critics against you, always more naysayers who says, you cannot do it. But you know what the problem is, and here's the problem. Negative attitudes are contagious. Man, it's like the common cold. Negative attitudes are contagious. These guys came back with this report. This whole congregation of people, they were enthusiastic about moving over, possessing the land. And these 10 spies, with their negative report, infected that whole community, that congregation, because it's contagious. They overestimated the problem. And it happens every time we look through the eyes of fear. The next thing is, when we look through the eyes of fear, we underestimate our own abilities. This spy says we seem like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we look the same to them. We underestimate our own abilities. Like a low self-esteem. You see, these people have been slaves for 400 years. 400 years, slaves. And now they have tasted freedom. The chains have been taken away from their hands and from their feet, and the chains have been now placed upon their minds. You know, people will tell you about all the things that you cannot achieve. They will tell you that you can't do this because you're not educated enough, because you're not the right size, because you're not the right looks, because of your background. They will tell you you cannot do it. And sometimes, these critics come from those people who are close to us, who have influence upon our lives. Like parents. Who will speak negative things into the lives of their children. And teachers who would dismiss a student because of some infraction. Sometimes siblings, sometimes our peers tells us we are not going to amount to anything. But the sad thing is, we believe it. We believe it. And we imprison ourselves. But listen, let me tell you something, my brothers and sisters. Despite what anybody might have said, you are who God says you are. You can do what God says you can do. You are an overcomer. You are a mighty man of valor. God is speaking to you, not to the person behind you. You're a mighty man of valor. You're Abraham, not Abram. You're the father of many nations, not just a high father. You are Israel, not Jacob. You are a prince with God and man. You're not just some deceiver. You are who God says you are. Not what the world says you are. We underestimate our own abilities. It's easier to get us out of Egypt, you know, than to get Egypt out of us. We underestimate our own abilities. And so here's what happens when we look to the eyes of faith. One, my problem shrinks. Oh, when I look at his face, my problems fade. When I behold him, when I see through the eyes of faith, my problem shrinks. And you see God as a big God. And when you see God as a big God, our problems are small. If we see God as a small God, then our problems are big. Faith shrinks my problems. Scripture says, is anything too hard for the Lord? No, nothing. Nothing is impossible with God, the scripture says. And so faith then shrinks my problems. And when I look through the eyes of faith, brothers and sisters, my perspective changes. It changes, as the song said, I can see clearly now. The rain has gone. Yeah, Bev, that's Jimmy Cliff. My perspective changes. I can see more clearly now. So let me ask you a question, brothers and sisters. As you look now around you, what do you see? As you enter into your promised land, what do you see as you're about to embark upon a new phase of life? What do you see? Opportunities or dread? Hope or hopelessness? We know that there is a crisis in our land. We know that. When the temptation is for all of us to cower in fear because of the crisis in our land, in our country, in our communities, in our schools, in our homes, yes. Those are some of the giants that we face. And sometimes we become overwhelmed when we look at the situation, the crime situation and the gang situation. And you know what's happening in our country. And sometimes we can become overwhelmed, just like these 10 spies. And we think there's no way out. There's no way we can take the land. There's no way we can redeem a country again. There is no way, it seems sometimes. But listen, if there's ever been a time when the world needs Christ followers who care about hurting people, Christ followers who will reach out to a lost and a hurting and a dying world, today is that day. We must not retreat, brothers and sisters. We must not be intimidated. Because listen, we cannot ever forget our God. He specializes in slaying giants. He specializes. Listen. You can ask David. He'll tell you the story. God specializes and slaying mountains, slaying giants. You can ask Joshua, the mountain that Joshua wanted when he crossed over. The mountain was ruled and run by the sons of Anak, warrior giants. But Joshua says, I want my mountain. I want my mountain. And the scripture says he went and he possessed that mountain. We serve a God who specializes, brothers and sisters, in slaying giants. We are a people who can look through the eyes of faith and says, yes, no matter what's happening in our country, no matter what's happening in our nation, listen, we are well able to overcome. Well able to possess the land. Well able to bring the healing balm